I always ask, do you think America is healthy in general? Do you think we are the healthiest nation on the planet? We are absolutely the worst out of the first world nations. We have the highest diabetes rates. We have the highest obesity rates. We have the highest cancer rates for most categories. We have diseases coming out of our you-know-whats because we tend to not work on those three things: our physical health, our chemical health, our mental health. So just by being here, we're working on our mental health, and hopefully you learn some things that you can take back with you so that you eat better and you eat less sugar. Because ultimately, when we talk about sugar, if I ask one thing, what does sugar do to you? What's the number one thing that it does to you? Energy, I mean, it gives you energy, but when you take too much sugar, what does it do? Insulin, of course. Too much sugar. Makes you tired, sure. Glucose. The truth is that sugar creates inflammation. And inflammation is the cornerstone of every major disease. Cancer, heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune disease, arthritis. All cornerstones of inflammation. Inflammation, specifically when you have high blood sugar, it causes damage to your arterial walls, the walls of your arteries. That leads to little tears, which hold fat and hold molecules there, which cause plaquing. That is the real reason of heart disease. People say, oh, it's because you don't exercise. All those are factors, but sugar is our number one thing. And I'll, in my last talk, I talked about how the government has set this up. From 1977, we funded the farming production of corn. Soy as well, but corn is the biggest one. And because we were producing so much corn, so much more corn than we could ever consume, and it started to become genetically modified into a form that we can't even eat. It had to be processed into something. And so the two main things that it's processed into is high fructose corn syrup as the main one, and then ethanol, which is another one. And so you look at it, ethanol can be used as an alternative fuel, but it can be turned into many things that are used in processed food. So we have created new markets specifically because we produce so much corn. And it's high fructose corn syrup is now put into everything. That same corn is fed to our animals. Those animals become sick and fat and diseased. We slaughter them and we eat them. What happens to any species on the planet that eats diseased animals? They get sick and they become diseased. And so this is the syndrome X, which a lot of doctors are talking about. Syndrome X, which is we have way too much sugar in our diet. We become obese. We lose our energy. We start becoming sugar burners and not fat burners. We'll talk about metabolism in a second. We start becoming inflamed inside and outside, and then we eventually start having autoimmune diseases and heart disease and cancer. And so this is happening to our population. We are not a super healthy population in the United States. So the goal is to start thinking about things differently. And we're going to give you some specifics on how that is. I'm not going to talk about how sugar is bad, because we all know sugar is bad, and we all know that too much sugar is bad. And even I go to talk to these kids in school, and these are elementary school kids. And I have a candy bar in one hand, and I have an apple in the other hand. I said, okay, kids, which is better for you? And they all say, apple. Great. And then at the end of my talk, I say, okay, I got a candy bar and an apple. Who wants what? And they all go, candy, candy. And I just spent 20 minutes talking about how candy's bad. So the premise is that there is other factors, mental factors, addictions, things that make us crave this food. One of the things they're doing now is they're putting in alcohol into the sugar molecule. And so they're combining alcohol with sugar. And it's got an effect on addiction. So our bodies crave it more. And so we've known for many, many years that if you combine sugar, fat, and salt together in different combinations, it can become instantly addictive. We can create an addictive quality with animals. So when you give it to an animal, at first it doesn't know what it is because it's not natural to them. It tastes it, and you can see its brain going, whoa, this is cool. And then they eat the whole thing, even if they're full. And that's the bet you can't bite one chip. You know, that the slogans and stuff are clear. They're adding these things to our foods to make them more addictive, to make you want them, to give you some sort of happiness and endorphin rush and all that kind of stuff. And so these are part of the tricks they're using. We're going to go over that. So coming back. So obviously we're going to go over the various sources of sugar. If you look on your notes, it says, where's all that sugar hiding? When you read a label, excuse me, obviously we look for glucose, because glucose is the one and only sugar that our cells can create ATP or energy. Can you tell me the cycle that it uses? I know she knows it. Krebs cycle. So if you go back to your physiology days, Krebs cycle is that cycle that the mitochondria in our cells use this cycle to take glucose and create ATP, which is energy. Any other sugar, galactose, fructose, lactose, anything else, has to be converted into glucose to make it make our bodies be able to use it. Here's the problem with high fructose corn syrup. One molecule of fructose can create many, many molecules of glucose. So they give you one small amount of fructose and we create way more sugar out of it. Our liver's splitting it up. Picture, instead of like a small piece of cake, they give you the whole cake and we cut it into pieces, right? So a lot of these things are hidden in our food. So when you look at this, things that maybe you didn't look at, evaporated cane juice, you wouldn't normally think that's sugar, but it's sugar. You know, and some of these things have a higher glycemic index than others. So what's glycemic index? Anyone know? Glycemic index is a term we use that shows how much a food raises your blood sugar. And so things that are very high on the glycemic index cause a rapid increase in blood sugar. What happens when you rapidly increase blood sugar? What happens to your insulin levels?
They're supposed to increase.
They're supposed to rapidly increase. So they go, it's like two waves. The glucose increases in your blood sugar, the insulin increases in your blood sugar. Glucose decreases, insulin decreases. So they go together like a wave. If you eat a ton of high sugary foods, you get these massive, and high on the glycemic index, you get these massive surges followed by a massive surge of insulin. Insulin helps get the blood sugar out of the blood and into your cells. And in a lot of times it helps it convert the sugar into fat. So we want that because we don't want to have that high blood sugar there for too long because it damages the walls of our artery. But we have these surges going on. And if you have a lifetime of surge, big waves, just like the ocean, big waves, eventually our body gets burnt out on that. And our receptors for insulin kind of get damaged and they get burnt out. And then we can't reduce the blood sugar as effectively. The insulin doesn't work as effectively. What disease is that called? Diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So adult onset diabetes is a direct result to what you eat. So if you have adult onset diabetes, which I guarantee you, here's one of my concerns, I know we talked a little bit about this, is everybody is pre-diabetic in this room. Everybody. Because the tests kind of lead you that path. We all are exposed to sugar. We're all pre-diabetics. And in some cases they're saying, hey, you should go on pills. Because your blood sugar is not high, but you're pre-diabetic, so why don't you just go on the pills now? Save yourself some time. And that's so backwards thinking, you know? So the truth is that if you have these burnt out receptors and the insulin is no longer working as well, then it is much smarter to start eating better foods that have lower glycemic indexes that cause a gradual rise in sugar and a gradual decline so that the insulin levels gradually increase and decline, which gives your body more time to react to them. So learning to read your labels and recognize sugar. I was going to put on here a label of a health food bar, nature-made health food bar, and it had at least 17 different sources of sugar in there. And so just reading the label. But a better thing, and this is the new labeling thing that they put in, is a lot of foods contain sugar. In fact, I had several people that said, I don't need to come to your class tonight, Dr. Ross, because I already know that sugar's bad and I don't have sugar in my diet. Well, guess what? We all have sugar in our diet, whether we want to or not. It's in our other foods. It's in meat. It's in vegetables. It's in fruit. It's natural. Now, by the way, if you eat a natural source of sugar with a lot of phytonutrients around there, what happens when we digest it? Do you think it spikes the sugar or gradually increases the sugar? Gradually. So when we eat natural, like sugar in the raw, for example, is those packets, which comes the whole nutrient package. It's got the glucose, but it's surrounded by other things. And it takes your body longer to digest that, so your blood sugar rises more naturally. Whereas if you just eat pure white processed sugar, it only has glucose in it. As soon as it gets into your bloodstream, it shoots up there, right? Very high glycemic index. So natural sources of sugar like fruit are much better and much healthier than artificial sources. So the label here, you can see the big arrow says sugars 1 gram, added sugars 0. So this shows you, without looking very far, how much additional sugar that company put in their food. And of course the additional sugar is artificial, or it's processed. They do that for several reasons. One is to make it taste better, but secondly, and more sinister reasons, is to make it more addictive and to make it more attractive to them and all that, or to the person that eats it. So you have all your same things on there, because things do have sugar in them, but this would show you if there's added sugar, which makes a big difference. I have a lot of parents that say, well, it has 12 grams of sugar. Oh, I didn't want to give them that because it has 10 grams of sugar, and so forth. But we don't know how much is natural, how much is unnatural. Like I said before, your body needs sugar. There's no question we need sugar. We just don't need it in the huge amounts of doses. For example, if you have a cup of coffee, a lot of people put sugar in the coffee. They might put 1 teaspoon in there. Some people put 2 teaspoons in there. Some people put honey in there, but other sweeteners to take out the bitterness of the coffee. In a 12-ounce cup of coffee, which is a big cup of coffee, 1 or 2 sugars usually sweetens it enough that it's palatable and stuff. First of all, how much do you think a latte, how much sugar do you think a latte has in terms of spoonfuls? Just take a guess. It's a lot of grams. So it's about 12 full spoonfuls of sugar in an equivalent thing. How about a soda, 12-ounce soda? How many spoonfuls of sugar in a soda? 12. Yeah, it's 12 full things of teaspoons of sugar. If I was to give you the sugar first and say, well, we're going to put some water in there and dilute it down, you'd be like, what? I'm not drinking that. But we drink the latte, and those pumps, each pump is like sugar through and through. And by the way, this isn't like natural sugar. This is high fructose corn syrup, right? So reading the label is so vital. The low fat, reduced fat, low sugar, all that stuff. How many people think that's good for you? We use a very easy thing to remember. If it says diet on it, don't consume it. If it says low fat, low whatever it is, it's deceptive. Don't consume it. In fact, I say just don't consume as much as you can. Don't consume any processed food. Eat real food. Eat food that grown or that was planted or picked or whatever it is. But if you have to eat food that's processed, which we all do at some point, eat stuff that just has nothing on there that says about that. Because here's what they do. So if you have, let's say, a certain amount of fat, let's say it's 10 grams of fat, and let's say it's 200 calories. 200 calories total, 10 grams of fat. The fat then percentage-wise is 10 out of 200, right? So that would be your percentage if you just calculate that. If I add calories to that thing, then the fat percentage drops. So an easy way to lower your percentage of fat in this product is to add sugar. Have I made that more of a diet product by adding sugar? But that's exactly what they do. They add sugar and they say this is lower fat. Now with lower fat. And what they mean is that the percentage of fat compared to the overall calories is less. But that's because the calories are more. Stuff like that. That's incredible. So all that stuff is deceptive. By the way, and I did a whole class on aspartame and saccharin and stevia, and I've been showing that video on it. If you believe that stuff is healthy for you, that aspartame and whatever it is, then I would ask you what company produced it. Monsanto. If anyone believes that Monsanto is a healthy company that wants the good for us, this is the company that wants to patent every seed for planting. They want to have the patent on it. So if you want to plant it, you got to pay them. And they want to genetically modify every seed, everything that God created, they want to modify into what they want it for. So this is the company, if a company produces anything from Monsanto, understand that that's bad for you. It's not good. So all those artificial sweeteners, just avoid them. Avoid them like the plague. I'd much rather you have sugar than that. Make sense? Stevia is an herb. So stevia is a natural herb. It's a sweet herb by nature. It literally has no side effects that I've ever seen. So as long as you can get past the taste, because it's a little different than sugar, and it's much more powerful than sugar. And so a little bit goes a long way, but it is much better. For those of you who didn't catch that video, stevia was a herb that around the late 1990s, they were on the cusp of getting it classified as a sweetener, so an artificial sweetener. And so if they got that label, then it would be able to be put into diet sodas and diet products and diet gum and everything could be with stevia. And they wouldn't have to say now with stevia or anything, they would just say, it's got 0 calories, just like they do now. And an anonymous call came to the FDA and said, we have concerns that stevia is dangerous for the public. And so the FDA kiboshed the whole thing and said, well, someone's got concerns. So we're not going to label this as a sweetener. It's labeled purely as a supplement, but it's not a sweetener, so they can't have diet drinks with it. So that ended, and nobody ever asked who this anonymous caller was and all that kind of stuff. At the time, though, Monsanto was good buddies with the president, and there was clearly government ties there. So everyone knows that it was Monsanto representatives that called and said, don't shut off our cash cow. We own NutraSweet. We want this to continue, period. They've since sold NutraSweet, but the government has never labeled stevia as a sweetener. So you will see it in products. It'll say with stevia, or sometimes it'll say supplemented with stevia, but it's never classed as a sweetener. And so this is government stuff. This is our great non-corruptible government. The insulin cycle. So we talked about that already. We talked about how high insulin levels that are in the blood because high blood sugar, if the receptors are not working, or if the insulin levels drop because they're not working, then obviously that's a problem. But changing your diet to reflect that is the obvious solution. Sugar spikes, we talked about that as well. So the higher the sugar spike, the longer the blood sugar is high, the more inflammation is caused in your body. Inflammation, as I said, is the number one reason why we develop diseases like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases. High blood sugar is the cause. So if you're going to take anything, reduce your sugar, because that reduces inflammation. What's the number one symptom physically of high inflammation in the body? Pain. You want to stop your arthritis pain? Eat less sugar. And I don't know how many times we've seen it where someone's got fibromyalgia type pains, achy pains in their joints, nondescript pains, and we just put them on a sugar cleanse where we say just 1 week, no sugar. no artificial, no added sugar. And they go, man, after 1 week, my energy's back. I feel so much better. I can move better. My joints don't hurt as much, just from sugar. Now, sugar's not the enemy. It's the high spikes of sugar. So then we slowly implement a little bit of sugar, natural sugars, in terms of fruits and vegetables, and build it up, because you need sugar. Don't get me wrong, you need sugar, but not in those high doses. So that moves us on to metabolism. So the vast majority, something like 90% of people in the United States, are what we call sugar burners. They burn sugar as much as possible. They avoid burning fat as much as possible. So their body's in this cycle where when sugar comes in, it's pushed into the cells until it's full, and then they make fat. Then they take the excess sugar and they produce fat. But when the sugar drops lower, they have stored sugar, what's called glycogen, within the cells, and they burn that as long as humanly possible, and they don't go to their fat cells. And so the only time they would ever go to their fat cells is when the glycogen is exhausted, which in the most people in the North American diet never happens, or almost never happens. That's why we suggest burst training as your best exercise. Burst training exhausts the glycogen levels within your cells as fast as possible and as complete as possible. And when that's done, your body has no choice but to go to your fat cells and start creating that pathway. What really boils down to it is what's called epigenetics. Epigenetics means we all have the same genetic code, but we express different parts of it. That's why we look different. That's why we sound different. That's why we are different. We are different on the inside, different on the outside, because our epigenes control different parts of our genetic code. But epigenes aren't like genes. Genetics can't be changed. We are our genetic code. But the epigenes can be moved around. And the epigenetic expression that we have right now is because of what our parents did. So their lifestyle, their who they were, created a blueprint which we inherited, and then we started out with that. But if you eat differently and exercise differently and think differently, the physical, mental, chemical, we can change our epigenetic expression considerably. And that's been shown over and over and over again. So in other words, the diseases that your parents had and their parents had are not necessarily the diseases that you need to have. You can change that to a great degree, but you got to do different things than they did. You got to exercise differently, think differently, and have a different chemistry, right? So when we talk about how to change that metabolism, it boils down to two things: diet and exercise. You got to do things differently. So the diet is real easy. Avoid the added sugar. And that means less processed food. It means more real food. It means and everyone's a little different in how this will work, because we all have different metabolisms and different enzymes and so forth. But proteins and good healthy fats are a mainstay. And then also you want to have vegetables as a main part of every meal. So it's pretty simple. And then when you add other stuff like breads or carbohydrates or pasta or whatever it is, then those would be a small adjunct to add flavor or taste or whatever it is. It's not like huge spaghetti meal with one tiny meatball. It's one big meatball and a little bit of spaghetti. Difference? And then you put some vegetables on the side. Make you hungry? No. So eating differently and then the exercise is an easy one. So the exercise, you want to have aerobic exercise every day, and that can be a walk, can be a light bike ride, it can be even when you're working, that increases your heart rate and so forth. And then you want to augment with burst training. Burst training means you go quite fast for a certain amount of time, like it could be a minute, and then you slow way down. A minute of walking, and then a minute of speed walking, and then a minute of walking, and a minute of speed walking, and a minute of walking. When you do that, you burn out all your glycogen from your cells and from your tissues. And you go into what's called ketosis, which means you're now burning fat. The more you work on that cycle of burning fat, the more that pathway becomes more usable. And the more we use that, the more our body says, you know what? Rather than going to the pantry over there, we can grab one fat molecule and spread it all out, and it works great. And it has less negative effects on us. And we don't have to store the sugar over there. Even stored sugar has an inflammatory effect, whereas the fat usage doesn't. This question?
Sometimes the body goes after your muscles.
Only in starvation.
Okay.
Yep.
I thought that was easier to get to than dissolving fat.
No,
It's not, okay.
no. Once you develop that fat pathway, it's a grooved pathway. It's actually more efficient than, so probably the least efficient is to take proteins and convert them into glucose. That's kind of your last option. In starvation mode, and we're going to talk about fasting here, mini fasting. In starvation mode, that's what your body has to do. It's used up your fat and it's trying not to use anymore, and then it starts taking protein from your muscles. And that's a very negative thing. That's not what you want at all. In fact, probably the problem with fasting is that your body starts to go, uh-oh, there's no food around. We'd better really ration the fat. We're going to use this at the last possible cause because this is what's going to keep us alive. And so you start taking from other places. That's why fasting is so hard, because you start burning protein and all that kind of stuff. So some of the newest research is on mini fasting, or fasting for one day a week. And it doesn't even have to be a whole day. You can say, I'm going to skip breakfast and lunch. So I will still have dinner, but just doing that reduces the glycogen within your cells and starts burning the fat. And your body doesn't go into starvation mode because it knows dinner's coming, right? So it's like, I don't have to hoard this. I'll just utilize this, and I know dinner's coming and we'll have more calories and so forth. So fast can be one day a week. It can be a whole day. So you can say no eating from Monday morning all the way through Tuesday morning. And when you wake up on Tuesday morning, then you have a normal breakfast and you go about your week, or somewhat normal.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, you got to watch out for eating too much. Yeah. But.
So in the mini fast, we're really looking at being off food for 16 hours. If we're going to do a partial day.
Partial day. Yep. So if you look at it from the standpoint of when you go to bed, so that's 8 hours, and then there's from morning till evening, that's maybe another 8 hours. So that's like 16 hours total.
Okay.
So you're right. So the other thing that comes into play is your sleep cycle. So you have a cycle that goes on every day, and that is you build and you break down. You build and you break down. That's a very simplistic model. Build, break down, build, break down. It doesn't actually happen quite that simple, but that is an easy way to explain it. So when do we build? When we are under parasympathetic control of the nervous system. That means you're sleeping or you're resting. You're building when you're sleeping or resting, and then when you wake up and you have to start going, then the sympathetic control comes over and you start breaking down, and your muscles are getting used, and you're breaking your body down, and then you build back up and you break down, and you build back up and you break down. So this is a normal cycle that goes on. Now, if you are not getting enough sleep, or if you're not having enough time in the parasympathetic realm, which happens to a lot of people, they're go, 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 they're frazzled, they're staying up late, they're waking up early, they're working all day, they're not giving their body a rest, then you build, break down, build, break down, build, break down. And you can see where your body's going until something actually breaks, where they kind of have breakdown, whereas if you are at a nice level balance where you're building, breaking down, building, breaking down, then you stay relatively healthy through that. So not eating right before you sleep is a major component. And it has to be at least an hour, and I usually recommend 2 hours, because your body will take all that sugar that you've just eaten, or fats or proteins, and it will deposit right into fat. It doesn't need it. We're not burning right now. We're in build mode. So we're going to put that away into fat, and we're going to build back up. And so really we don't need that much energy when we're sleeping. And again, that's a simplistic model, because we do use energy while we're sleeping, but But not eating right before bed is an easy way to not develop the opposite pathway to what we were talking about. Fat metabolism is fat storage. So when there's a ton of extra sugar, our bodies develop the fat storage pathways, and they become really used. And every time there's excess sugar, it goes right to fat. And so that's where you want to avoid that. And an easy way to do that is that burst training, which uses the opposite metabolism, and then the not eating right before sleep. Make sense? So obviously, I recommend, and what I do, I have for years. I did it long before it was a fad. I kind of do mini fasts on every so often, and the mini fasts weren't intentional, but that was just the way I felt better. And so I recommend that you start out missing one meal at first. See how you feel, make sure you're comfortable with that. And then as you get more comfortable, then you can miss 2 meals, and then maybe even go 3 meals, or do a mini meal somewhere in there, and kind of give your body that chance to not starve, but also utilize this other pathway more. You'll find that you actually have more energy. This is the ultimate, one of the reasons I love golf is because it's filled with these opposites. If you want to hit the ball farther, swing less hard. If you want to get the most out of your ball, don't try so hard. I mean, it's like crazy that would work, but the harder you try and hit something, the less far it's going to go. And the same is true in the body. So when you are exercising, you don't have to exercise the highest level. You just have to go and kind of push yourself a little bit, and you'll get more out of that than going hardcore. And the same is true of fasting. A little bit of fast is good. You're not tricking your body into going crazy, and you kind of go along with it. The process too of sleep is you can't try to sleep better. You just have to let it happen, and don't try and force any of those kind of things. So when you stop giving, trying to force something, you'll get much better results. That makes sense? Tried to work that into golf. Didn't quite go. These are some herbs and some foods that when you supplement, that can really help regulate blood sugar, decrease the amount. So cinnamon, that's an easy one. Cinnamon really helps with decreasing a inflammatory response in your body to sugar, and that's A1C. When on your labs, we'll take labs to see where your inflammatory response is.
The comment here says that it increases the A1C. Is that what I'm?
Oh no, sorry, that's a typo.
Okay.
Yeah, it decreases A1C. Thanks for pointing that out. Ginseng helps reduce blood glucose along with chromium. So chromium and ginseng are the two things that we give diabetics that have a hard time with blood sugar, is because those things tend to regulate blood sugar better. Quality protein. Now this goes along with eating. So you want to eat quality fats, quality protein, and protein taken from commercial sources. Those cows and those chickens and those pigs and whatever, they're fed sugar, pure sugar. So those are diseased animals that literally have sugar pushed up into their protein. Their fat is actually, when you burn fat from those animals, it burns hotter than other animals. And the reason is that they had sugar, so much sugar, and it was converted into fat. It's not like these molecules are completely separate. They were actually just converted, and the same molecules. And so when you're eating protein, you want to eat good quality sources of protein, stuff that's been grass-fed, animals that are wild in nature, that weren't raised in a small box and like a chicken or something like that. So I always say spend a little more money on your food and you'll get a lot more over the long haul. And that's eat at Trader Joe's or shop at Trader Joe's, shop at some of these other places that have good sources of meat if you're going to eat meat. If you're going out to eat, by the way, that's all you're getting is commercial, unless it's a specialty restaurant or something.
There's a burger outfit that has grass-fed meat now.
Yeah, and Paul Martin's does too. So there's a few. It's coming along. It's changing. Vinegar is a good one.
ACV or apple cider
Yeah,
vinegar,
apple
right?
cider
Right.
vinegar is no, not white vinegar. Apple cider vinegar
Clarify
or
that.
yep. And you can do that if you can stomach it. Little teaspoon right down the hatch.
Lemon and apple cider vinegar and water.
Yep, if you can stomach it, it works good. So I put on here foods to avoid. If you didn't know that candy and soda and ice cream and cookies is bad, now you know. If you have questions about that, please let me know. So some of the things that are tricky are like stuff with added sugar. So yogurt has a ton of added sugar. Soups and stews have a ton of added sugar. You don't realize, like for example, someone says, well, McDonald's is cheap, that's why I eat there. So you ask yourself, well, what's McDonald's got? Let's say I have a hamburger and fries and a drink. So the hamburger was, the cow was fed sugar, right? So it's a sugar-fed cow. The bun has got added sugar. The ketchup and the relish and all of the stuff, that's all added sugar. You got a tomato on there, maybe a little bit of lettuce. So there's that hamburger. Then the soda is pure sugar. We've already talked about how many teaspoons. The fries, generally taken with corn oil, fried in there, and the carbohydrates from the genetically modified potato. It's all just sugar. So that's what you're eating. And how much of that did the government subsidize? All of it. So you think it's cheap, but it has two main costs. One is we've already paid for it with our taxes because we have already subsidized it, right? And the second is it's got a high cost in terms of your health. So it will cause a high rise in blood sugar, inflammation, all that kind of stuff. So you look at those kind of things, they don't pay, they cost.
That guy that tried to stay on their food for 30 days.
Right. Yeah. The doctors actually said to him, because that shows that you may have saw was but about a guy that ate McDonald's and nothing but McDonald's for 30 days. That was his goal. And every time they said, would you like to supersize that? He said yes. But he wouldn't supersize it unless they asked him. It was called Supersize Me, if you want to see it. And so after something like 20 days, his doctors, who was going in, his cholesterol skyrocketed, his A1C skyrocketed, his liver was literally shutting down. He was having kidney problems. He was having all sorts of issues. His doctor, after 20 days, said, this is asinine. You've got to stop. You're killing yourself, and you may die from doing this. Morning, lunch, dinner, and that's how quickly it took. Supersize Me is a great documentary. So fruit juice is a big one because my mom used to give me fruit juice when I used to go to school and stuff. Here, you take fruit juice, better than soda. Fruit juice has just as much sugar as soda. And, it might be a slightly better variety. It might be actually, glucose and not high fructose corn syrup. But fruit juice is something that I don't recommend anybody drink, period.
Our pomegranates are coming in. Make them impressive.
Well, you can juice something, and it has the phytonutrients within the juice if you juice it right away, but it still has a high amount of sugar.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so small amount. Dried fruit is another one. So I used to have little dried fruit and dried bananas and stuff like that. High sugar. I mean, they have a lot of sugar.
Because I know that apricots are stepping up and dates. They're not treated.
They're not. A lot of these things are not treated. They're natural, so they're better than candy, but they're high sugar. And you got to understand that they have high sugar. So a small amount goes a long way. Sugar-filled sauces, which would include salad dressings, barbecue sauce, ketchup, all tons of sugar in there. Tomato sauce, of course. Breads and cereals. Cereal's probably the worst one. I can't imagine these cereals that say, hey, Cocoa Krispies, part of a balanced diet. What kind of balanced diet is eating pure sugar? And if you look at it, it's good for a balanced books for the companies that make it, but it's not good for the kids. And if you look on there, if this label gets passed, then the added sugars on those cereals will be skyrocketing. So it's not that they just take like carbohydrates and and grains and stuff and put them in, they add a ton of sugar. What gets me the most is some of them have excitotoxins put in, like MSG, and they use those in hydrolyzed yeast, which are basically forms of sugar or salt, but they are there to stimulate your taste buds in your brain in such a way that they make it addictive, and you are almost instantly attracted to this because it lights up your brain in a certain way. They've taken these studies where they've given someone cocaine and they've mapped out the parts of their brain that come alive, and then they've done the exact same thing with sugar, and their brain looks identical. It's alive, and all you have to take. In fact, Damon's son was here, and he had some of our mints from up front, and he was running around, and I'm like, that's sugar. You can see it on kids. As soon as they eat a few, they just start buzzing, and they want to run, and they want to play, and they crash into walls and all that kind of stuff. Take Wonder Bread with all its additives and its added sugar and stuff like that, that thing will stay soft for months. In fact, you leave it on the counter. It used to be that you take a piece of bread and you leave it on the counter, and then you could watch the mold spores growing out of it. Wonder Bread, you leave it on the counter, not even mold will touch that stuff. But we'll feed it to ourselves, and we'll feed it to our kids. So bread is one that, and we could get into glucose, and we could get into, glutens and other stuff to avoid from some breads and stuff like that. But pure and simply, it's a good food to limit. Yogurt with fruit in there.
Just totally eliminate gluten problem.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. So what I recommend for you guys is that you do a sugar cleanse. A sugar cleanse can be as long or as little as you want to make it. But a sugar cleanse would be that you can take in almost no added sources of sugar for a period of time. 1 week is generally what I recommend. And believe me, 1 week, it seems like that's not that bad, So it would be obviously no soda, no spoonfuls of sugar in your coffee, that kind of stuff. It would be no pumpkin pie, sorry. It would be no processed foods, so you're not having any of those kind of things. It would be, you can eat proteins. For the most part, you can eat vegetables, no fruit. So you want to eliminate fruit. So you are just eating basically vegetables and protein and some fat. You can have some fat in there. If you're not sure, then you can kind of look at it like for example, you might not be sure about breakfast. You have an egg and maybe you have a piece of bacon or something like that, but you're not having bread and you're not having any carbohydrates or sugar in your fruit or anything like that. And so you do that for a week, every meal for a week. And you see, and that would include no rice, no pasta, none of those kind of things. So you try and do that for 1 week and see how you feel. And then you slowly add it back in, And, well, yeah, if you want to stay in that way, yeah. The other thing is I recommend you try, if you've never tried burst training, try burst training. When you go for a walk, even if it's just a walk, go for 30 seconds hard and then a minute, real easy, just slow. Let your heart rate come down, then go for 30 seconds hard, slow. And that way you will get much more out of your exercise than you ever did before.